Hi, this is Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Totally Booked with Zibby, formerly Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. In my daily show, I interview today's latest best-selling, buzziest, or underrated authors and story creators whose work I think is worth your time. As a bookstore owner, publisher, author, and obviously podcaster, I get a comprehensive look at everything that's coming out and spend my time curating the best books so you don't have to. Stay in the know, get insider insights, and connect with guests like I do every single day. For more information, go to zibbymedia.com and follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens. Miranda Cowley Heller is the author of What the Deep Water Knows, Poems, and I am so excited because at Zibby Publishing, we are publishing this book by Miranda Cowley Heller, and it is so good. We have the US rights, and I could not be more excited. You must go check this out. You'll remember Miranda Cowley Heller because her debut novel was The Paper Palace, which was a #1 New York Times bestseller in the US, a Sunday Times bestseller in the UK, and was longlisted for the Women's Prize. It was also a Reese's Book Club pick. She has worked as senior vice president and head of drama series at HBO, developing and overseeing such shows as The Sopranos, 6 Feet Under, The Wire, Deadwood, and Big Love, among others. This is her first collection of poetry, and again, we are so thrilled to be publishing it. If you loved The Paper Palace, you will be obsessed with this book. Go buy it today. What the Deep Water Knows, Miranda Cowley Heller. Welcome, Miranda. Thank you so much for coming on Totally Booked with Zibby to talk about What the Deep Water Knows, Poems. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to see you. I haven't seen you in ages.
I know, you too. Oh my gosh. So I'm ridiculously excited to be bringing this collection of poems to the US. I couldn't believe it when I saw you post. And I'm like, wait, you have a new collection of poems and nobody's publishing these in the US? It was the greatest moment for me. I'm like, what? Why?
I think for both of us, by the way, I was so happy. So yeah, no, it's perfect.
Well, we are so honored. And as you know, I was a rabid fan of The Paper Palace, just ridiculous. So your writing is so amazing in these poems. Oh my gosh. You can use any form to turn the woman's experience into art, basically.
Oh my God. Thank you. Love that. Trying. It's all we have to do, right? It's all we can do.
Why don't you tell listeners what the collection is really about and how it came to be and everything else?
That's a really easy thing to answer, Zibby. Thank you. Everything else is hard. Actually, the collection is really, it's poetry taken from probably 15 years of writing. So a lot of it predates The Paper Palace, in fact, and none of it was written in a particular order, but came obviously out of sort of a distillation of emotion at a particular moment in time. But when I went back to the sort of drawing board of what out of many, many, many poems and, body of work that I, thought should be in a collection, hopefully. And when I'd finished that process, which in fact, took me about a year really to kind of really go through and generate new work and so on. But when I finally had about, 100 pieces, and I thought, well, a lot will get cut, or, as one does. And I sort of put it all out on my bed. I was in Los Angeles, and I went, oh, that's interesting. These are poems about childhood, and these are about, motherhood and marriage and the falling apart of a marriage and the bitter aftermath, and then sort of surviving it, and then I think kind of evolving as a woman into a certain age. And so I just put it all together, and I realized that I'd been telling a story kind of all along, even though I hadn't been aware of that fact over the years. And I think that was sort of an amazing thing for me because in a funny way, I would say The Paper Palace tells a similar story, but I hadn't, the unconscious is a funny thing. Let's put it that way, because Elle's story is told, as I'm sure you remember having read it, that it's in little tiny pieces that add up to a life. And that really is what this collection is. Even though I would say each poem, I hope, stands on its own, they're linked. They tell a story of survival and evolution and a sort of, I hope, a sort of distillation of feeling as well. but they have lots of different forms. There might be very sort of magical realism or surrealism or realism or sort of quotidian reality. But I feel like they tell, a woman's life story, and I hope it's really relatable to women, that, every woman or man, but who reads it will find something really about themselves, to think about, I guess.
And when did you become drawn to poetry as a form? Was it just something you always did, or what?
It's so funny you ask. I was on Cape Cod at Christmas, and I was cleaning out a closet, and I came across this really old sketch pad. My stepfather's an artist, and it was an old thing of, pencil drawings. And then I opened it up, and in it was a poem that in his handwriting, in pencil, that I had written when I was 5 years old. And he'd written it all down, and it's, and wrote Miranda Cowley at the bottom, right? So I guess that's where it started, right? And then my grandfather, who was a poet, I don't know if you know, he was a literary critic and so on, but he's also a published poet. He published his first volume of poetry, I think, in 1929. And so poetry was always huge for him as a form and for all of us. And, he did the collection of Walt Whitman. And so I was very influenced by that growing up and so on.
And what was his name if people want to Google him and start reading his poems?
His name is Malcolm Cowley, and he's known really as a literary editor and sort of chronicler of a generation of writers. But he was also a wonderful poet. But he was Kerouac's editor. He was, he was Faulkner's editor. He was a man of letters. But he was also, first and foremost, as a young man, a poet. And anyway, so I would tell this because there's somebody who's doing my grandfather's biography, and he was in where his papers are kept. And he sends me these images, and he's found in my grandfather's papers a little book of poetry that I wrote for him for his birthday of nature poems.
Aww.
And I was about 8 years old, and there's lots of misspellings, and the handwriting's really crazy. But you find these artifacts and you go, oh, because one forgets, and you have a whole life and a trajectory. And then suddenly it's like, oh, yeah. So I would say that was the very beginning. Then I came back to it quite a few years later. I mean, I was always writing poetry, but I wasn't in that mindset. And, it led to the novel. Funnily enough, people often go, oh, well, did it come out of? No, in fact, it led to it because at a certain point, I'd started a novel, and I was so tightly wound in my writing. And so I put it away for a long time, and I went back to poetry. And you write from a dreamlike place, you write from a very unconscious place. And so you don't know what you're looking for, but you're digging without a goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so you kind of come across stuff. And that ability to go, oh, I love the blank page. I don't have to, go back and revise. I can just write from that place. Made me go back to the book ultimately and write the novel in a very different way. So they're very combined for me. And, I think in the acknowledgements of the Paper Palace, not to talk too much about that book, but, one of the things I talk about is that fiction is poetry.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of pieces of poems ended up actually in the novel. So people may or may not recognize a few different lines that inspired me in scenes where I was kind of couldn't figure out where it was going, and I knew I needed something. And I'd go back and look at old poetry and go, oh, that's what this scene is going to, be based on, or be a jumping off point for.
So Paper Palace obviously was Reese's book club pick. Is there a movie situation happening or not? I should have Googled, but I did not.
That's okay. No, there isn't at the moment. There was a miniseries situation happening at HBO.
Okay.
And then there's been a lot of changes at HBO. And so they gave it back to me ultimately. And I've sort of sat on it, to be honest, because I think ultimately it should be a film, but I'm doing other things. And so I hope, I think eventually it will definitely be a movie, but I just don't know when. I've gotten offers and I'm like, we'll see. I don't want to do it the wrong way. Let's put it that way.
Got it. Amazing. Okay. So take me into like your most recent poem that you wrote.
Oh gosh. Funnily enough, and is it the most recent in the collection? Let's talk about the collection. There's a poem it's called The Arctic Circle, and it's about a marriage and about, letting go of one's spouse in some way. And the funniest thing is that's the most recent thing I'd written. And it wasn't, obviously, like, it's about feeling and distillation, but like, I don't know. I think part of it was, and this might be a sort of weird admission, but I really needed to take some more ownership of what had happened in my marriage. And, I think having worked on this and worked on this and worked and evolved as a human being myself, I hope, I really felt just I need to take some ownership, and that's what came out. So that's, funnily enough, the most recent poem in the book.
So what can you share about your actual marriage?
Well, without going into too much detail, we were married for 30 years. Actually, we're still married, but not for much longer. And, he did what men often do. He ran off with somebody. And it was very heartbreaking and very, very difficult. But, as I say in that particular poem, I feel like I let go of the rope in a way. I was focusing on other things. I was, not fighting for something before that happened. And that's sort of what I wanted to take some responsibility for, because these things are always complicated. And the irony being, of course, that everybody thought, oh, the paper palace is true, which it wasn't, obviously. I mean, I wish that guy existed, but he's he's like the ultimate, he's like a combination of like Heathcliff and Darcy and, every other romantic hero who would only love you, you know what I mean? That thing. But the irony was that, in fact, that couples thing did happen, but it happened in the other direction. And not because of the book. That was, the timing wasn't the same. But yeah, that is what happened. So, and we have, we're fine and we're friends, and he's completely fine with this collection. And I said, do you want to read everything? And he said, yes, of course, when it comes out, along with everybody else. It's art. And he knows it's not autobiographical. Obviously, some pieces are, and all poetry is personal. You don't really write poems about, well, maybe not all, but you're not going to write like a Russian spy poem or a
new genre to hit the market.
A new genre. So it is, of course, personal and emotional, but it isn't necessarily it's not a literal experience in any sense. There are some that are, but by and large, not. So.
Well, you write a lot about motherhood and sometimes the isolation and those types of feelings that can come with it, trying to find your way through, and the trickiness of that. How do you feel about translating motherhood into words, and also how are you feeling about it sort of in general at this phase?
Well, at this phase, I feel great because I have these two amazing sons who are very grown up in their ways, but also still figuring themselves out. My younger son just graduated from college in this last spring, and they've like turned into the most loving, strapping young men. They're so sweet to me.
Aww.
And they've been really like at my side. Now, needless to say, there was a lot of drama growing up. Let's put it that way. Motherhood is a difficult path, and there are lots of different mothers in this collection. And there's me as a mother, there's my mother as a mother, there's mothers who aren't obviously my mother or me, because I think motherhood is part of the story in the sense that we inherit so much and it shapes us. And that I inherit what I inherit from how I was mothered, let's say, is going to trickle into how I mother, whether I like it or not, even if it's in sort of the antithesis of what happened. I mean, I'm sure as a mom, that a lot of what you actually end up doing is the opposite, and that's not necessarily better, right? Because the opposite might be just as extreme in its way, but you find your way, and there's a lot of rocks and turns along the way. But at the end, I have these two 6'4" handsome young men who kind of take me by the arms and, give lots of hugs. And it's pretty great, actually.
Oh, 6'4". Oh my
Both of
gosh.
them. I know, both
Wow.
of them.
Yeah. No, I'm not going to have any 6'4" children. Strapping, yes, but not 6'4". Are you writing anything now?
I have been working on something for a while, and I'm really hoping. Actually, it's taken me a really long time, and also I've been generating a lot of poetry. So it's taken me a very long time to remember myself as a writer. And actually, funnily enough, what I was talking about why I got stuck on The Paper Palace and wanted to go back to poetry is actually why I got stuck on this project, because I got into my own head.
Mm-hmm.
Right? After you publish a book and people respond to it, then it's really hard to go, oh, this doesn't matter because no one's ever going to read it, So I can just, express myself in that way, and who knows what will happen. Suddenly I got too much, I'm analyzing it, So I put it aside about a month or two ago, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to calm down. I've written a chunk of it, but I'm discovering it, and I will, but it's been a funny thing writing a second novel.
It's hard to shut off the self-critic anyway, but especially in the aftermath of that, and knowing when I started my last book in big letters at the top, I was like, nobody will read this but me. And even
that's how I started The Paper Palace. Literally, sorry to interrupt you. That is
really
what I did. Yeah, that's the only way I could write it.
Too funny.
Yeah, exactly how. And so I can say anything I want because no one's ever going to read it.
Yeah.
No one's going to get mad. Nobody's going to read into it. I can say anything I want, That's exactly what I did.
Piece of paper. Funny. Oh my gosh.
I love that. Kindred spirits.
The tricks we have to play with ourselves.
Uptight New York girls with a lot of expectations. Something like that.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. So who are you taking inspiration from these days? What types of books are you reading, or have you read anything great lately? Or
yes, I have read a few. Well, I've been reading a lot of novels recently, and also novels that haven't come out yet, but that I think are absolutely wonderful. And also things I just hadn't read before. So that's been kind of I'd never read Jessamine Ward, and I read Sing Unburied Sing, and I was just going, oh, wow, wow. So that kind of blew me away. Broken Country I loved. I don't know if you read it.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, and I ended up blurbing for that. I loved this book, Great Circle, which I just came across.
Maggie
It was so wonderful. And I've been reading a lot of women's fiction, I guess. What else have I read recently? Okay, I'm completely blanking. This is embarrassing.
No, you came up with 3.
I know. Okay, well, there's a few. And a memoir I read recently that is absolutely wonderful, if you haven't come across it, is called Exit Wounds. And it's by Peter Godwin, and it's one of the better books
I'm going to write it down.
I have read in a very long time. He's a memoirist, but it's really about the falling apart of his marriage at the same year his mother is dying. But it's about his whole life as a journalist and a war correspondent, and he grew up in Africa, and his sister was murdered in Africa when they were quite young. There's a lot in it, but it's so funny and so clever. You will love it, I promise you. I couldn't believe it. I was on a sort of, not a panel with him, but we were at the same writers' festival in Australia, and so I heard him talking about it and started and couldn't stop.
Oh, okay.
I highly recommend. Yeah, definitely.
I have to get off the Zoom so I can add it to cart.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have for aspiring authors? Obviously not silence the self-critic, because we're still obviously both working on that. But in general, for poets too, because also poetry is not always the most hot off the press, the new collection of poems, and yet they are so gorgeous and so inspiring. How do we breathe new life into that too?
Well, that is something that is really important to me, actually. I think poetry has gotten a kind of a bad reputation, and I'm probably going to get destroyed for saying this, but I think poets themselves have a lot of responsibility for that, in the sense that there's a lot of writing to one another in a certain way. And I think it's almost like an academic, like academia. It's a certain sense of, not all, of course, and there's so many poets I love, but I think there's a misconception that it's like music, right? Not anybody, but you hear the Moonlight Sonata, let's say, and you feel it, right? And that's classical music. But then you hear some very dissonant modern composer, and you feel many people sort of left out. They don't understand it. And so it's almost like they're trying to translate something. And I think what's so important is to have a combination of powerful, real words, but that also are accessible and meaningful and honest and raw, but in a way that no matter what is said, somebody can actually feel your feeling, or it becomes their own feeling, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And poetry, funnily enough now, I mean, with the world as it is and short clips of things, it's funny because poetry is actually the most beautiful short form, isn't it? And so, you can go and listen to somebody read a poem and just have it. I mean, recently I just happened to be listening because I wanted to hear her voice, to Mary Oliver. And she just read this poem that, we all know and we've all heard, and Wild Geese, and not we all, but whatever. And I was like, just hearing her read it, watching her read it, it was YouTube, but her voice and her tone and the words just went, whoa, for that reason, because you can read it in a collection as well, obviously. And hopefully people will, and hopefully they will. I mean, I really hope that it touches readers, so.
Yeah, I think we need to give poetry a rebrand.
Yeah,
right? Don't have time for the book, just read her poem.
Or do both. But yeah.
Or do both. Buy the book, read the poem.
I mean, and by the way, there's quite a lot of crossover, like I was saying, in terms of the stories are, what our stories are, yes. And they are made up of journeys from childhood.
Yes.
If you are a mother, or even if you aren't, you take a journey in your life, and that's what this collection's about anyway,
Absolutely. Oh, well, you've left me with so much to do. I'm going to watch the YouTube of Mary Oliver reading Wild Geese. I'm going to buy Exit Wounds. Oh my gosh. And somehow pick up the rights for the Paper Palace. So there we go. Miranda, congratulations. I'm so excited. I'm so honored that you're trusting Zibby Publishing with this collection. We cannot wait to bring it into the world, and just so much more to come. So yay.
Yay. And also, I just feel like you've become such an amazing advocate and face for books in this way that's so important. So thank you.
Thanks. Okay. More soon. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Totally Booked with Zibby, formerly Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you loved the show, tell a friend, leave a review, follow me on Instagram @ZibbyOwens, and spread the word. Thanks so much. Oh, and buy the books.